The old Wickiup stood defiant against the darkening Arizona sky, its damaged roof a testament to the fury of last night's storm. Clara Whitcomb watched the approaching figure with wary eyes, a lean Apache brave, his face weathered beyond his. Years, moving with the cautious grace of a hunted man. Desperation had driven her to this arrangement. A widow alone in the territory couldn't afford principles or prejudice, only pragmatism. What the townspeople would say didn't matter anymore. The hole in her roof wouldn't fix itself. She had no way of knowing that this simple act of hiring Kóshíí would unearth something ancient and vengeful, buried in the very beams of her home. Something that had been waiting, patient as the desert itself. Could the strange markings he discovered truly be containing a spirit that would bring terror to the entire territory? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Clara's fingers closed around the silver pocket watch, her thumb, tracing the worn initials etched into its case. J.W. James Whitcomb. 3 years gone now, but some mornings she still reached across the empty space beside her before remembering. The watch no longer kept proper time, but she carried it nonetheless. A reminder that even in this harsh territory, time was precious and fleeting. The morning sun cast long shadows across her modest homestead, 15 acres of stubborn land at the edge of the Coronado Mountains. A Wickiup-style kitchen stood separate from the main cabin, built by James after he'd taken an interest in Apache construction methods. More practical for this climate than anything they teach in Boston, he'd said, adapting traditional techniques with his own innovations. The dome-shaped structure of interwoven branches plastered with clay had withstood 3 summers and winters, until yesterday's storm tore a jagged hole through its northern side. Clara stepped carefully around the shattered clay vessels on the dirt floor, gathering what could be salvaged. Without that kitchen, preparing meals during the coming summer heat would be unbearable. The main cabin's iron stove turned the small space into an oven from May to September. She glanced at the meager coins in her palm payment from Mrs. Thornton for last week's laundry. Not nearly enough for proper repairs, especially since none of the town's carpenters would venture this far out. For a widow with a reputation for unnatural sympathies toward the natives, the thought formed slowly, reluctantly. The Apache camp by Coyote Creek was less than half a day's ride. James had traded with them often enough. They knew how to build these structures. They had invented them, after all. "You've gone mad, Clara," she muttered to herself, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. But what choice did she have? The nearest town, Silver Springs, tolerated her at best. Since James died, the polite invitations had stopped. Her excessive education and peculiar ideas were no longer balanced by her husband's standing as a respected geologist. She changed into her riding skirt, packed a small bundle of trade goods, and saddled her mare. The town already whispered about the widow who reads scientific journals. This would merely give them something new to cluck their tongues about. The ride to Coyote Creek took longer than she remembered. The landscape seemed to shift between breath-sparse pine forests, giving way to red rock formations, and back again. Arizona Territory, 1876. Not where she had imagined herself at 32. Not widowed. Not desperate enough to seek help from. People the territory was actively trying to eliminate. The Apache camp appeared suddenly around a bend in the creek, a tsura collection of brush shelters set against the red cliff face. Clara noted how the camp had changed since her last visit with James. Fewer dwellings, more temporary in nature. The forced relocations had taken their toll. An elderly woman spotted her first, calling out in Apache. 2 men approached, rifles held casually but ready. Clara recognized the older one, Nalin, who had sometimes guided James to mineral deposits in the mountains. "I seek help," Clara said, using the few Apache phrases James had taught her. "My Wickiup broken." She gestured with her hands to mime. "A hole in a roof." Nallen's weathered face remained impassive as he translated for the others. A discussion followed, too rapid for Clara to catch any familiar words. Finally, Nallen turned back to her. "Why Apache help white woman?" he asked in halting English. Clara reached into her saddlebag and removed the small bundle she'd prepared: coffee beans, sugar, a small sack of cornmeal. "Not charity, but fair trade for skilled work. My husband James, he respected your ways." She said, "I need someone who understands how to fix what he built. I can pay." She held out the goods. Nallen studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Tomorrow. Send Kóshíí. He knows building ways." Clara felt a tension she hadn't realized she'd been holding release from her shoulders. "Thank you," she said, placing the goods in Nallen's outstretched hands. As she mounted her mare for the return journey, Clara couldn't help but wonder if she just made a terrible mistake. But the hole in her roof wouldn't fix itself, and principles couldn't keep the summer heat at bay. Kóshíí unwrapped the small bundle containing his eagle feather medicine pouch, carefully laying it beside him on the flat rock overlooking the camp. 3 months of hiding from the bluecoats had left him gaunt. His once muscular frame now leaned to the point of weakness. His people called him Red Hawk for the unusual russet tinge to his black hair, visible now in the early morning light. As he unwound his headband, the elder's decision to send him to the white woman's homestead tomorrow troubled him. True, he needed the food. His last successful hunt was 8 days ago, a scrawny jackrabbit that barely took the edge off his hunger. But venturing so close to white settlements was dangerous, especially for a warrior who had escaped from the San Carlos reservation. "You waste your strength with worry," a voice said behind him. Nallen, his mother's uncle, climbed up to join him on the rock. The elder's face was deeply lined, each wrinkle earned through 80 summers in this harsh land. "The bluecoats search everywhere," Kóshíí replied, fingering the medicine pouch. "This woman could betray me for the bounty." "This one is different," Nallen said. "Her man learned our ways. Built his cooking place like our women build." The elder's eyes gazed toward the distant mountains. "She is alone now, needs help. And I need food," Kóshíí admitted reluctantly. His father had taught him pride, but also practicality. A starving warrior was of no use to his people. "She offers fair trade," Nallen said, handing over a small portion of the coffee beans Clara had brought. "And you were the best helper to your father when he built for the people." Kóshíí nodded, remembering the many wickiups and ceremonial structures he had helped construct before the soldiers came. His father had shown him how to select the proper branches, how to weave them for greatest strength, how to mix the clay. That would make the dwelling cool in summer and warm in winter. "The woman has red hair," Nallen added, as if this explained something important, "like the sunset." Kóshíí glanced sharply at the elder, suspecting some hidden meaning, but Nallen's face remained unreadable. The old ones often spoke this way, offering information that seemed insignificant, but later proved vital. That evening, Kóshíí prepared himself as if for battle. He cleaned his few tools: a knife, a small hatchet traded years ago for 3 deerskins. He would bring no weapon larger than these. Approaching a white homestead armed would be asking for death. Before gone, he secured his medicine pouch inside his shirt, close to his heart. The eagle feather it contained had been given to him by his father, who received it from his father before him. It connected him to the ancestors, to the land itself. Some of the young men in the camp had abandoned such traditions, seeing them as useless against the white man's bullets. But Kóshíí held to the old ways, even as he learned new ones. "Be watchful," Nallen advised as Kóshíí prepared to leave. "The woman's husband, he found things in the mountains. Things our ancestors warned about. He asked many questions. What things? Kóshíí asked, suddenly alert. Nalan's expression turned grave. The old markings. The warnings about the mountain. That breathes silver death. Kóshíí felt a chill despite the morning warmth. Everyone knew those legends. How the Spanish had dug into sacred mountains, releasing spirits that poisoned the water and air. His grandfather had shown him the ancient petroglyphs that told these stories, carved into hidden canyon walls. I will be careful, he promised, touching the medicine pouch through his shirt dot as he made his way toward the white woman's homestead. Kóshíí kept to the high ground, watching for dust clouds that might signal cavalry patrols. Hunger gnawed him, making him lightheaded. The small share of Clara's trading goods had barely taken the edge off after being divided among the camp dot by mid-morning. He spotted the homestead nestled against the foothills. From his vantage point, he could see the main cabin, a corral with a single horse and the damaged Wickiup standing separate from the house. He studied the surrounding area carefully before descending. No signs of visitors. No fresh tracks. Still, as he approached the final stretch of open ground, Kóshíí felt exposed, vulnerable. The medicine pouch pressed against his chest, a small comfort against the vastness of his uncertainty. Clara was in the garden when she spotted the figure approaching from the western ridge. She straightened, one hand shielding her eyes from the morning sun, the other instinctively reaching for the small derringer she kept in her apron pocket. Since James died, the man moved with a deliberate grace that spoke of caution rather than threat, and as he drew closer, she recognized the distinctive red-tinged black hair Nalan had described. She set down her trowel beside the struggling tomato plants and moved to meet him at the edge of the cleared land. Up close, his gauntness was more apparent, cheekbones sharp beneath copper skin, his eyes dark and watchful. You must be Kóshíí, she said, wiping soil from her hands onto her apron. I'm Clara Whitcomb. He nodded once, his gaze moving past her to study the damaged Wickiup. Clara noticed how his eyes catalogued everything: the corral, the cabin, the small garden, likely looking for signs of other people or traps, the wariness of a hunted man. Are you hungry? She asked, gesturing toward the cabin. I can offer you something before you look at the roof. A flicker of something surprise perhaps crossed his face before he nodded again. Clara led the way, aware of the careful distance he maintained between them. Inside the cabin, she indicated the small table while she moved to the iron stove. It's not much, biscuits and jerky. The coffee's still hot. Kóshíí sat with his back to the wall, facing the door. Clara placed the food before him, then stepped back, giving him space. He ate methodically, efficiently, a man accustomed to making food last. My husband built the Wickiup, she said to fill the silence. James, he admired your people's building methods. She moved to a trunk in the corner and withdrew a leather-bound journal. He kept notes on everything. Kóshíí's eyes followed the journal as she placed it on the table. He wrote about the techniques, Clara continued, drew diagrams. He was a geologist by training, but he had an interest in how different peoples adapted to the land. For the first time, Kóshíí spoke. Your man. He asked many questions of our elders. His English was accented but clear. Clara nodded. James believed there was wisdom in your people's understanding of this territory. The settlers who came from the east tried to force methods that worked elsewhere. She gestured to the journal. He wrote that the Wickiup design was perfectly suited to the temperature extremes here. A hint of approval flickered across Kóshíí's face. Your man was wise to see this. He finished the last of the food and stood. I will look at the damage. Now, outside, Kóshíí circled the Wickiup, studying it from all angles before approaching the damaged section. Clara watched as he examined the broken branches and the clay mixture that had cracked and fallen away. Your man built well, he said finally. Use the right woods. The right clay. He pointed to where the damage was worst. But here, the support is not as our people would do it. Clara retrieved James's journal and found the pages with his Wickiup diagrams. He mentioned having trouble with this section. Sighed he couldn't quite grasp the proper technique. Kóshíí glanced at the drawings, a flash of recognition in his eyes as he saw the carefully rendered illustrations. I can fix it, make it stronger. He looked up at the sky, gauging the sun's position. We'll need new branches. Clay from the creek. Whatever you need, Clara said. I have tools in the shed, a wagon if you need to collect materials. Before he could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Clara felt Kóshíí tense beside her, his hand moving subtly toward the small hatchet at his belt. Stay here, she said quietly. It's probably just one of the neighbors. Around the bend in the rough track came two riders. Clara recognized Thomas Fletcher, who owned the cattle ranch bordering her land to the south, and his son Will, reined in their horses at the sight of Kóshíí. Mrs. Whitcomb, Fletcher called, his tone falsely pleasant while his eyes remained fixed on the Apache. Thought we should check on you after that storm. Seems you've got yourself some ... help. Clara moved forward, placing herself slightly between the riders and Kóshíí. Mr. Fletcher, how thoughtful. As you can see, I'm having my kitchen repaired. Fletcher's mouth tightened beneath his gray mustache. Don't recall any carpenters. In these parts, being Red Indians. My arrangement with Kóshíí is not your concern, Mr. Fletcher, Clara said, her voice steady despite the tension coiling in her stomach. Fletcher shifted in his saddle. It is when you bring his kind this. Close to decent folk. There's a reason they're supposed to be on the reservation. This is my property, Clara replied, and I'll hire whom I please to work on it. Will Fletcher, barely 20 and already mimicking his father's hard eyes, spat on the ground. Pa, we should ride to town. Tell Marshal Jenkins. That won't be necessary, Clara interrupted. Kóshíí is here at my invitation to repair storm damage. Nothing more. The elder Fletcher studied her for a long moment, then Kóshíí, who stood perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Your husband had peculiar ideas, Mrs. Whitcomb. Seems you've inherited them. He gathered his reins. Don't come crying. To us if you wake up scalped. Clara held her tongue until the Fletchers had ridden out of sight. I apologize for that, she said, turning to Kóshíí. His face remained impassive. White men fear what they do not understand. He gestured toward the Wickiup. We should begin work. For the next few hours, Clara assisted as Kóshíí directed, gathering materials he needed. They worked in a surprisingly comfortable silence, broken only by his occasional instructions. By mid-afternoon, he had removed the most damaged sections of the roof and begun preparing replacements. Clara was inside the Wickiup, clearing debris, when she heard a sharp intake of breath from above. She looked up to see Kóshíí frozen on the ladder, staring at something in the exposed rafters. What is it? She asked. He didn't answer immediately, instead reaching carefully toward one of the main support beams. His fingers traced what appeared to be markings in the wood. Clara moved closer, squinting up at the dim interior. There are carvings, she said. I never noticed those before. Kóshíí descended the ladder quickly, his expression grave. These are not simple carvings. He took a smudged piece of charcoal from his pouch and a scrap of hide, making a rubbing of one of the exposed symbols. Clara studied the result, a complex, geometric pattern interwoven with what appeared to be stylized animal forms. What do they mean? Kóshíí's eyes met hers, weighing something. Finally, he said, these are protection symbols. Old magic. He gestured to the pattern. This one keeps evil spirits bound. This one, he pointed to another section, warns of poison. In the earth. James never mentioned finding these, Clara said, reaching for the journal. She flipped through the pages, scanning his meticulous notes. Though there are several pages torn out near the back, Kóshíí continued examining the rafters. The markings are old, very old, but some are newer. He pointed to certain sections where the cuts looked fresher. These may have been added by your husband. A chill ran through Clara, despite the afternoon heat. Why would he carve protection symbols without telling me? To keep you safe, Kóshíí said simply. He ran his fingers along one of the beams, then suddenly drew back sharply. This is not good. What? Clara moved to his side. He pointed to a fragment of stone wedged into a joint between two rafters. This does not belong. Carefully, he pried it loose, a flat piece of reddish stone about the size of his palm, covered with similar markings to those carved in the beams. In the center was a spiral pattern surrounding what looked like a jagged mountain. What is it? Clara asked, reaching to touch it. Kóshíí pulled it back slightly. Part of something larger, a warning stone. He studied it intently. It speaks of Indolizin, the Black Eyes, a spirit that comes from the mountains when the earth is cut. Open. Clara felt a prickle of unease. Like mining? Kóshíí's gaze sharpened. Your husband, he studied the rocks. Did he find silver? Not that he told me about, Clara said, though he was interested in the old Spanish mines in the northern foothills. Kóshíí wrapped the stone fragment carefully in a piece of leather. I must speak with the elders about this. It is not safe to continue work until I know more. Not safe? Clara frowned. It's just a carving. No, Kóshíí said firmly. It is more, much more. He glanced up at the exposed rafters, his expression troubled. The old ones carved these symbols only when great danger threatened. To find them here, in this place, ... He shook his head. This is no accident. As dusk approached, Kóshíí insisted on performing a cleansing ritual before continuing. Work. Clara watched from a respectful distance as he burned sage and cedar, using an eagle feather to waft the smoke toward the exposed rafters, while chanting softly in Apache. Is that necessary? She asked when he had finished. Yes, he replied simply, returning the feather to his medicine pouch. The symbols were disturbed. The spirit must be calmed. Clara wasn't sure what to believe, but she recognized the gravity in his manner. Will you continue working tomorrow? Kóshíí nodded. I will. Return after speaking with the elders. The roof must be sealed before the next rain. He glanced at the darkening sky. But I should secure what we've uncovered for tonight. As they worked to temporarily cover the open section with a tarpaulin, Clara noticed something odd. The exposed markings seemed to catch the last rays of the setting sun, glowing faintly red for a moment before fading. Did you see that? She asked, pointing. Kóshíí followed her gaze, his expression unreadable. A trick of the light, he said, though he didn't sound convinced. After finishing their task, Clara insisted Kóshíí take some food for his return journey. As she was wrapping cornbread and jerky in a cloth, they heard the distinct sound of hoofbeats approaching. Kóshíí tensed, reaching for his hatchet. Stay inside, Clara said, moving to the window. Through the gathering darkness, she made out a single rider wearing the distinctive hat of a lawman. It's Marshal Jenkins. She stepped outside as Jenkins dismounted. He was a tall man with a weathered face and a carefully trimmed mustache that didn't quite hide the hardness of his mouth. Evening, Mrs. Whitcomb, he said, tipping his hat. His eyes darted to the Wickiup and back to her. Had a visit from Thomas Fletcher today. Said you'd taken on some unusual help. Clara crossed her arms. I don't see how my hiring decisions are. A matter for the law, Marshal. Jenkins hooked his thumbs in his belt, near his holstered revolver. When it involves an Apache who should be on the reservation, it becomes my concern. His gaze drifted to the cabin door. He's still here. Before Clara could answer, Kóshíí stepped out, standing straight but keeping his hands visible. Jenkins. Hand moved closer to his gun. I am Kóshíí of the Chiricahua, he said calmly. I am helping the widow fix her shelter. Jenkins studied him. You have papers allowing you off the reservation? He doesn't need papers on my property, Clara interjected. That's not how the law sees it, ma'am, Jenkins replied, not taking his eyes off Kóshíí. There's been trouble lately. 3 miners. Gone missing up near Bitter Creek. Livestock dead over at Pearson's ranch. Folks are jumpy. And naturally, you blame the Apache, Clara said. Jenkins finally looked at her. Not saying that. Just saying people are concerned. He turned back to Kóshíí. You seen anything unusual in these parts? Kóshíí's face remained impassive. No, Jenkins nodded slowly. Well, I'll be riding through regular like, Mrs. Whitcomb, for your safety. The implied threat wasn't subtle. After the marshal rode away, Clara sighed heavily. I'm sorry about that. Kóshíí was staring at the horizon, where a strange red glow had appeared above the distant mesas. That is not a normal sunset. Clara followed his gaze. The ruddy light seemed to pulse, almost like dust caught in the air, but confined to one area of the sky. What is it? I do not know, he admitted. But the elders speak of such signs when the earth is wounded. He turned to her, his face solemn in the fading light. There is something I must show you. From his pouch, he withdrew a small glass vial containing a silvery liquid that seemed to move of its own accord. I found this embedded in the wall of your Wickiup while removing the damaged sections. Clara took it carefully. It looks like quicksilver, mercury. She frowned. Why would that be in my wall? The Spanish used it for taking silver from the rock, Kóshíí said. The elders say it brings the sickness, makes men mad. Clara thought of James's research into the Old Spanish. Mine's his interest in local soil compositions. Could this be related to the protective symbols? Yes, Kóshíí said. I believe your husband knew something. Something dangerous. He glanced again at the red glow on the horizon. And I believe it is awakening. Clara clutched the vial, her mind racing. You should go before it gets fully dark. The marshal might return. Kóshíí nodded. Lock your doors tonight. I will return at dawn. He paused. And Clara, do not disturb the symbols further. Clara spent a restless night, her sleep fragmented by strange dreams of glowing symbols and mountains that breathed silver mist. She woke before dawn. James's journal clutched in her hands, though she didn't remember retrieving it. The early morning light cast long shadows as she made coffee, waiting for Kóshíí's return. When he appeared, he was not alone. An elderly Apache woman accompanied him, her face deeply lined, eyes sharp beneath gray-streaked hair. This is Nasha, Kóshíí said by way of introduction. She knows the old stories better than anyone. The old woman nodded once to Clara, then moved directly to the Wickiup without waiting for permission. Clara followed, watching as Nasha examined the exposed rafters with gnarled but steady fingers. She says the markings are from before the Spanish came. Kóshíí translated as the old woman spoke in Apache. They tell of a time when the mountain spirits grew angry because men took silver from sacred places. Nasha pointed to specific symbols, speaking rapidly. This warns of poison in the water, Kóshíí continued. This speaks of black eyes people, whose eyes turn dark when the sickness takes them. Clara shivered despite the morning warmth. What does she think it means, finding these here? After another exchange in Apache, Kóshíí said, she believes your husband found something. Something our people have feared for generations. Nasha reached into a pouch at her waist and withdrew a folded piece of parchment, handing it to Clara. Carefully unfolding it, Clara discovered an old map, the paper brittle with age. Faded Spanish text labeled various features, but what caught her attention was a series of markings in the northern foothills markings that matched those in the rafters. Where did this come from? She asked. It was hidden here, Kóshíí said, pointing to a narrow space between two rafters. Nasha found it while examining the symbols. Clara studied the map more carefully. The Spanish text identified several vidas de plata, silver veins, along with what appeared to be mining claims, dating back to the 1700s. One area was circled, in what looked like more recent ink, with James's distinctive handwriting noting mercury contamination. James was investigating the old mines, Clara murmured. He never told me why. While they examined the map, Nasha continued her inspection of the Wickiup. Suddenly, she called out sharply, pointing to where the morning sunlight illuminated one of the symbols. For a brief moment, Clara saw it glow with a faint reddish light, similar to the strange aurora they'd witnessed the previous evening. She says the spirit is stirring, Kóshíí translated, his voice tense. The binding is weakening. Clara was about to ask what that meant when a commotion from the corral drew their attention. Her mare was whinnying in distress, kicking at the fence posts. They hurried outside to find the horse pawing frantically at the ground near the water. The water in the trough had taken on a reddish tinge. Kóshíí dipped his fingers in the liquid and sniffed them cautiously. Iron, he said, like blood, but not blood. Clara fetched a glass jar from the cabin and collected a sample. The well has never had issues before. It begins, Nasha said in heavily accented English, her first direct words to Clara. She pointed to the distant mountains, then made a flowing gesture with her hands. What begins? Clara asked. Before either Apache could answer, they heard the approach of a wagon. Around the bend came a one-horse buggy driven by a portly man with spectacles and a black medical bag. Doc Miller, Clara identified him for Kóshíí, who had tensed at the arrival. The doctor reined in his horse, eyeing the two Apache with undisguised curiosity before tipping his hat to Clara. Mrs. Whitcomb, thought I'd check on you after that storm. Marshal Jenkins mentioned you might have some unusual company. Dr. Miller, this is Kóshíí and Nasha, Clara said formally. They're helping me repair my kitchen. Miller nodded, skeptically. I see. He climbed down from his buggy. Actually, I'm making rounds to all the outlying homesteads. There's been some strange occurrences lately. What kind of occurrences? Clara asked, thinking of the red-tinged water. Livestock falling ill without explanation. Water tasting metallic. He glanced at the Apache. Some folks are getting superstitious, talking about curses. Nasha spoke rapidly to Kóshíí, who translated for Clara. She asks if the sick ones have black eyes. Miller frowned. As a matter of fact, the Pearson boy who took ill last week did develop unusually dilated pupils. How would she know that? Clara exchanged a look with Kóshíí. Doctor, I think we may have discovered something important. Something Jems was researching. Before he died. Dr. Miller adjusted his spectacles as he examined the water sample in Clara's kitchen. There's definitely something unusual here, he said, holding the jar to the light. I've seen similar discoloration at the Pearson place and over at Willow Creek. Clara spread the Spanish map on the table. James marked areas of potential mercury contamination. The old Spanish silver mining operations used mercury to extract silver from ore. The doctor's eyebrows rose as understanding dawned. Mercury. Poisoning could explain the symptoms I've been seeing. He glanced at Nasha, who stood silently by the door. Not a curse at all, but science. Kóshíí translated this for Nasha, whose reply was curt and emphatic. She says the poison and the spirit are the same thing, Kóshíí explained. Our people have always known that disturbing the sacred mountains brings sickness. Miller looked skeptical but diplomatic. Different ways of understanding the same phenomenon, perhaps. He turned back to Clara. What I can't explain is why this is happening now. These mines have been abandoned for decades. Before Clara could respond, the sound of horses approaching drew their attention. Through the window, she saw Marshal Jenkins. accompanied by 2 other riders. "That's Richard Hargrove," Clara said, recognizing one of the men. "He represents the Silverado Mining Company. They've been trying to buy land all through this area." The newcomers dismounted, and Jenkins approached the cabin with Hargrove while the 3rd man waited with the horses. Clara met them at the door. "Mrs. Whitcomb," Jenkins nodded, then frowned at seeing Kóshíí still present. "I see your worker is still here." "As am I," said Dr. Miller, joining Clara at the door. "Good morning, Marshal. Mr. Hargrove." Hargrove was a slim man with a neatly trimmed beard and expensive Eastern clothes that looked out of place in the territory. "Mrs. Whitcomb," he said with practiced charm, "I was passing through the area and thought I'd take the opportunity to revisit our previous conversation." "My answer hasn't changed, Mr. Hargrove," Clara replied. "My land is not for sale." Hargrove's smile remained fixed. "In light of recent events, I thought you might reconsider. We're prepared to increase our offer substantially." He glanced past her, noting the map spread on the table. "What have you got there?" Clara moved to block his view. "Private property, Mr. Hargrove. Was there anything else?" Jenkins cleared his throat. "Actually, Mrs. Whitcomb, there's been increased Apache activity reported in the area. 3 more miners were found wandering near Bitter Creek yesterday, delirious with fever." His gaze shifted meaningfully to Kóshíí and Nasha. "Under the circumstances, I can't guarantee your safety with these ... guests." Hargrove nodded in false sympathy. "All the more reason to consider our offer." "A widow alone in these troubled times." "I'm not alone," Clara interrupted. "And I'm not afraid." "Perhaps you should be," Hargrove said, his tone harder. "The territorial governor has authorized military action against hostiles in this region. The cavalry could arrive any day." Kóshíí stiffened at this news, exchanging a rapid conversation with Nasha. "Is that a threat, Mr. Hargrove?" Dr. Miller asked mildly. "Merely information," Hargrove replied, "for Mrs. Whitcomb's benefit." After the unwelcome visitors departed, Clara turned to Kóshíí. "What did Nasha say?" "She says we must work quickly," he translated. "The signs are getting stronger. More people will sicken." Dr. Miller folded his arms. "I need to get these water samples to Silver Springs for proper testing. But I'm inclined to believe your mercury theory, Mrs. Whitcomb. It fits the symptoms perfectly." "But why now?" Clara pressed. "As you said, these mines have been abandoned for generations." Kóshíí's expression darkened. Nasha asked the same question of the marshal's companion. "Hargrove?" Clara frowned. "What about him?" The paper in his pocket. She saw the name Silverado Mining Company. "She asked me if they are digging in the old places." Clara felt a chill. They've been buying land all through the territory. If they've reopened the old Spanish mines, they could be releasing mercury that's been trapped underground for centuries. Dr. Miller finished. "Contaminating the watershed." Kóshíí nodded. Grimly, "The spirit awakens, just as the markings warned." Clara turned to the window, staring in the direction of the northern foothills. "We need to see for ourselves what's happening at those mines." She looked at Kóshíí. "Will you help me?" His dark eyes met hers. "Yes, but first we must finish securing your Wickiup. The symbols must be complete for protection." Dr. Miller gathered his hat. "I'll take these samples to town, ask some discreet questions about Silverado's operations." He paused at the door. "Be careful, Mrs. Whitcomb. Companies like Silverado don't take kindly to interference." As the sun climbed higher, Clara and Kóshíí worked to complete the Wickiup repairs. Nasha had returned to the Apache camp to warn the others about the cavalry's imminent arrival, taking the ancient map with her for safekeeping. "These support branches need to be placed in a specific pattern," Kóshíí explained, demonstrating the technique. "The way my father taught me, the way his father taught him." Clara watched his skilled hands weaving the flexible branches into the dome structure. Your father built many of these? Kóshíí nodded. He was known for his skill. Before the soldiers came, a shadow crossed his face. Before they burned our village and marched us to San Carlos. How did you escape the reservation? Clara asked, handing him another branch dot. His hands paused briefly. I did not escape. I never arrived. His voice was controlled, but Clara sensed the pain beneath. Our group was attacked by settlers during the march. Many died. I was separated in the chaos. Clara worked alongside him in silence for a moment. I'm sorry, she said finally. For what? You did not hold the guns. For all of it, she replied. For what my people have done to yours. Kóshíí glanced at her, surprise briefly visible. In his dark eyes before his expression returned to its usual stoicism. Your husband. He understood our ways better than most whites. James believed there was wisdom in every culture, Clara said, remembering her husband's passionate arguments with close-minded settlers. He thought we could learn from each other rather than destroy each other. As they worked, Clara found herself stealing glances at Kóshíí's sure movements, the quiet dignity in his bearing despite his circumstances. When their hands accidentally touched while passing tools, she felt an unexpected warmth that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun dot by midday. They had made significant progress. The Wickiup structure was nearly complete, with only the final clay mixture needing to be applied to seal the new section's dot. As they paused for water, a military dispatch rider appeared on the trail, stopping briefly at the property line when he spotted them. He surveyed the scene, his gaze lingering on Kóshíí before he continued toward town, spurring his horse to a gallop. Cavalry scout, Kóshíí said grimly. They are coming. Clara watched the dust trail disappear around the bend. How much time do you think we have? Not enough. He gestured to the Wickiup. But we must finish. The protection must be complete. As they resumed work, Clara broached the subject that had been bothering her. These symbols you're carving into, the new rafters, are they the same as the ones we found? Kóshíí nodded. The patterns must be unbroken to be effective. But what exactly are they protecting against? Mercury poisoning is a scientific phenomenon, not a spirit. Kóshíí's hands continued their precise work as he considered her question. Your science and our beliefs are not always separate things. The elders knew that disturbing the mountain brought sickness long before your people had words like mercury. He traced one of the completed symbols. These markings are a warning, but also a map. They show how the poison moves through the land, through water, through air. Clara thought about this. So when James added to these symbols, he was combining scientific knowledge with traditional wisdom? Yes, your husband understood. Kóshíí paused, studying her. You have his mind. You ask questions. You seek to understand. Something in his tone made Clara's cheeks warm. She busied herself mixing more clay. What will you do when the cavalry arrives in the territory? Hide, survive. His voice was matter-of-fact. As I have done since my people were scattered. Clara looked up at him. You could go north. My sister lives in Colorado Territory. She could help you reach the Ute lands. Kóshíí's expression remained unreadable. Why would you help me this way? Because it's right, Clara said simply. And because She hesitated, surprised by the strength of her feelings. I've come to respect you, Kóshíí. Something shifted in his eyes, a warmth, a recognition. For a moment, the cultural chasm between them seemed to narrow. The moment was broken by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. They both tensed, but it was only Dr. Miller returning, his buggy kicking up dust as he urged his horse to unusual speed. He reined in sharply. Clara, there's a cavalry detachment less than 2 hours behind me. Lieutenant Davies and 20 men. His face was grave as he looked at Kóshíí. They have orders to arrest any Apache found off the reservation. Clara moved protectively toward Kóshíí. On what charges? They don't need charges, Miller said grimly. And there's more. I overheard at the telegraph office Silverado Mining. Company has filed claim papers on all the land surrounding your property. They're moving in heavy equipment tomorrow. You need to go, Clara told Kóshíí urgently. Now, before the cavalry arrives. He shook his head. The Wickiup is not finished. The symbols must be completed. Is that worth your freedom? Your life? Clara demanded. Dr. Miller interrupted. There might be another option. He reached into his buggy and withdrew a small clay vessel, dark with age. I stopped by Sam Walker's place on my way back. He's that old prospector who used to guide for the survey teams. When I mentioned the mercury concerns, he gave me this. Clara took the vessel carefully. Inside were several small soil samples, each a different color and texture. Walker's been collecting these for years, Miller explained. Says different soils in the area show contamination patterns. The Apache apparently used special clay to detect poison in the water. Kóshíí examined the samples with interest. Yes, our healers use such clays. They change color when touched by the silver poison. Clara studied the vessel thoughtfully. This could help prove what's happening, but we need more evidence of Silverado's activities. I may have that too, Miller said. Town's been buzzing about 3 miners who stumbled into Silver Springs yesterday, babbling about seeing ghosts in the northern foothills. They were delirious, eyes black as coal classic mercury poisoning symptoms. And they were wearing Silverado company badges. Clara's mind raced. If Silverado is reopening the old Spanish mines without proper safeguards, they're poisoning the entire watershed, Miller finished grimly. Kóshíí had been silent, studying the soil samples. Now he looked up. These markings in your Wickiup, they are not just warnings. They are a map of the sacred places where the poison flows strongest. Clara turned to him, excitement building. James must have been tracking the contamination patterns. That's why. He incorporated these symbols into our home. He was documenting what he'd found. Precisely, Miller agreed. Your husband was a scientist at heart. He'd want evidence. A plan began forming in Clara's mind. Dr. Miller, can you delay the cavalry? Even an hour would help. The doctor adjusted his spectacles. Lieutenant Davies owes me a favor after I patched up his men last winter. I could intercept them. Perhaps suggest a medical inspection before they proceed. Good. That will give us time. Clara turned to Kóshíí. We need to finish the Wickiup quickly. Then you must hide. After dark, if it's safe, we'll investigate the old mine sites on the map. Kóshíí considered her for a long moment, then nodded. I will stay in the caves east of here. Come with a lantern when it is safe. After Dr. Miller departed, they worked with renewed urgency, applying the final clay mixture to seal the Wickiup's new sections. As the structure neared completion, Kóshíí carefully finished carving the protective symbols into the fresh support beams. There, he said finally, stepping back to survey their work. It is done. Clara watched as he traced the last symbol with his finger. To her amazement, the marking seemed to pulse briefly with a faint reddish glow, like an ember responding to his touch. Did you see that? She whispered. Kóshíí nodded solemnly. The spirit recognizes its name. From the newly completed Wickiup, Clara gathered supplies they would need for their investigation. James's journal, a lantern, canteens of water, and a small pistol she kept for protection. She hesitated, then added her husband's compass and magnifying glass dot as Kóshíí prepared to leave for his hiding place. Clara impulsively caught his arm. Be careful, she said, her voice softer than she'd intended. His dark eyes met hers, and his hand briefly covered hers where it rested on his arm. You also, he replied simply. After he disappeared into the brush, Clara waited anxiously, watching the road for any sign of the cavalry. Instead, just before sunset, she was surprised to see a solitary figure approaching on foot. An old man with a white beard and a prospector's weathered hat. "Sam Walker," she murmured, recognizing the visitor. The old prospector had been one of the few people who had maintained friendly relations with James, sharing knowledge of the territory's geography. "Evening, Mrs. Whitcomb," Walker called as he neared the cabin. "Doc Miller said you might need some help understanding what your husband was working on." Clara met him at the edge of her property. "You knew what James was investigating?" Walker nodded, his roomy eyes serious beneath bushy white brows. Those Spanish mines have been killing folks for 200 years. Your husband was the first white man smart enough to connect the symptoms with the source." He gestured toward the Wickiup. "That there's more than just a kitchen, ain't it? It's built on an old Apache sacred site, a warning post." Clara's eyes widened. "How did you know?" The old man chuckled. "Lived in these parts 60 years, Mom. Learned a thing or two from the natives before the government decided they needed killing or corralling." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "Thought you might want to see this. Map of the old Spanish workings that ain't on any official charts." Clara spread Walker's map on the cabin table beside the Spanish one they'd found in the Wickiup. The similarities were striking, but Walker's version contained additional markings and annotations. "These cross-hatched areas," Walker explained, his gnarled finger tracing the markings, "show where the Spanish used mercury amalgamation to process silver ore. Nasty business. They'd crush the ore, mix it with mercury, then heat it to separate the silver. And the mercury?" Clara asked. "Some was recovered and reused. Much of it seeped into the ground or evaporated." Walker shook his head. "They didn't understand the danger, or didn't care. The Spanish priest who made this map was different. Educated man. Noticed the connection between the mines and the sicknesses." Clara examined the faded handwriting at the map's edge. "Is this Spanish?" "Latin," Walker corrected. "Journal entries." The priest documented symptoms among the native workers: trembling, madness, vision problems. "Black eyes," Clara murmured, remembering Kóshíí's description. "Exactly," Walker nodded. "When the Apache workers fell ill, their people said the mountain spirit had cursed them for disturbing sacred ground. The priest believed both explanations, the scientific and the spiritual, might be describing the same truth." Clara thought of James, meticulously incorporating Apache warning symbols into their home. "Like my husband." "Your James was a rare sort," Walker agreed. "Most men out here see only what their narrow minds allow." A distant whinny caught their attention. Clara moved to the window and spotted a lone rider approaching in the fading light. "Expecting company?" Walker asked, hand moving to the ancient Colt at his hip. Clara relaxed slightly, recognizing the silhouette. "It's Dr. Miller." The doctor dismounted wearily, his clothes dusty from hard riding. "I've bought you some time," he reported. "Convinced Lieutenant Davies to make camp and rest his men before continuing, but they'll be here by mid-morning tomorrow." "That should be enough," Clara said. Sam Walker's brought valuable information about the old mines. Miller brightened at seeing the prospector. "Walker, just the man we need. What can you tell us about these Silverado operations?" The old man spat disgustedly. "Corporate vultures. They've been quietly acquiring land around the old Spanish diggings for months. Word is they've found a mother lode in the northern foothills rich enough to justify reopening the abandoned shafts, without any precautions regarding mercury." "Contamination?" Miller asked. "Precautions cut into profits," Walker said cynically. "Besides, most folks don't make the connection between the mines and the sicknesses. Just blame bad water or Apache curses." As the men conferred, Clara slipped outside to check for any sign of patrols. The Wickiup stood completed in the gathering dusk, its newly repaired dome solid against the purple twilight. As she passed it, she noticed something strange. The symbols carved into the support beams were faintly visible. glowing with a subtle reddish light. She approached cautiously, touching one of the markings. It felt warm beneath her fingers, pulsing like something alive. "They grow stronger as night falls," came Kóshíí's voice from the shadows. Clara started. "I thought you were hiding in the caves." "I was." He stepped into view. "But the signs called me back. Something is happening." Together they entered the Wickiup. Inside, the symbols glowed more prominently, casting eerie patterns on the clay walls. "What does it mean?" Clara whispered. "The spirit is active tonight," Kóshíí replied. "The poison flows strongly." They returned to the cabin where Miller and Walker were still studying the maps. Both men looked up in surprise at seeing Kóshíí. "Thought you'd be halfway to the Superstition Mountains by now," Walker commented. "He came back because something's happening with the symbols," Clara explained. "They're glowing." Miller looked skeptical, but Walker nodded solemnly. "The old magic stirs when the danger grows." "Magic or not," Miller interjected practically, "we need to investigate these mines. If Silverado is releasing mercury into the watershed, people will continue falling ill." "And not just people," Walker added. "Livestock, wildlife. Mercury poisoning affects everything." "I know where the main Spanish shaft lies," Kóshíí said. "My father showed me when I was young. It is a forbidden place to our people Inda. Lizen's dwelling." Clara made a decision. "We'll go tonight. All of us." She turned to Kóshíí. "Can you guide us?" He nodded. "But we must be careful. The cavalry will have scouts watching the trails." "Leave that to me," Walker said with a crooked grin. "Spent half my life avoiding the law in these hills." As they prepared for the expedition, gathering lanterns and supplies, Clara felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. In just 3 days, her isolated existence had been completely upended, first by a hole in her roof, then by the arrival of Kóshíí, and now by the unfolding mystery her husband had left behind. She caught Kóshíí watching her, his dark eyes reflecting the lantern light. "Are you afraid?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she admitted, "but that won't stop me." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You have a warrior's heart, Clara Whitcomb." Under the cover of darkness, the 4 unlikely allies made their way toward the northern foothills. Walker led them along forgotten game trails that skirted the main roads where cavalry patrols might be watching. Kóshíí moved like a shadow, scouting ahead and occasionally doubling back to ensure they weren't followed. Clara carried a small glass vial for collecting water samples, along with James's journal. Dr. Miller brought his medical bag, containing equipment that might help detect contamination. "Not much farther," Walker whispered as they entered a narrow canyon. "The main Spanish shaft is just beyond that ridge." Clara noticed that the vegetation here was sparse and sickly, with withered leaves and stunted growth. A small stream trickled through the canyon floor, its water gleaming oddly in the moonlight. Dr. Miller knelt to examine it. "There's a metallic sheen on the surface," he observed, carefully filling a small bottle with the liquid. Kóshíí's expression was grim. "The poison water." They continued up the canyon until Walker signaled for them to douse their lanterns. Ahead, the faint glow of work lights illuminated a camp near the canyon's mouth. Men moved about, loading equipment onto wagons. "Silverado operations," Walker murmured. "Working through the night." They crept closer, using the rugged terrain for cover. Clara could now see that the camp surrounded the entrance to an old mine shaft. A crude sign marked Silverado Mining Co., authorized personnel only, had been erected near the entrance. "Look there," Miller pointed to a stream emerging from the mine entrance. Even in the dim light, they could see its unnatural color, a sickly reddish-brown that seemed to carry flecks of silver. "Mercury and ore waste," Walker confirmed. "They're flushing the old workings to access deeper veins." Clara felt sick as she watched the contaminated water flow downhill toward the watershed that serve the entire region. How many people draw water downstream from here? Every homestead for 20 miles, Miller replied. Not to mention the grazing lands for cattle. Kóshíí was studying the ridgeline above the mine. There, he said quietly, pointing to a series of markings carved into the rock face. The ancient warnings. Clara squinted, just able to make out symbols similar to those in her Wickiup. They knew, she whispered. The original inhabitants marked this place as dangerous. And Silverado is ignoring the warnings, Walker added bitterly. They retreated to a safe distance to discuss their findings. Miller examined the water sample under a small magnifying glass. There's definitely mercury contamination. With this evidence, we could petition the territorial governor to halt operations. That would take weeks, Clara objected. People are falling ill now. We need immediate proof of the connection, Miller agreed. Something to convince the marshal to act. Kóshíí had been silent, watching the mine entrance thoughtfully. Now he spoke. There is a way to show the poison's path. The old ones used special clay to draw it from water. Like a filter? Clara asked. Yes, it turns black when it catches the poison. Walker nodded excitedly. I've seen that clay. The Apache used it to purify drinking water. My people have gathered this clay for generations, Kóshíí explained. There is a deposit near the eastern caves where I was hiding. Clara made a quick decision. We'll split up. Kóshíí and I will collect the clay. Dr. Miller, you take our water samples to town and alert Marshal Jenkins. What about me? Walker asked. Can you keep watch on the Silverado operation? We need to know what they're planning. The old prospector grinned. Spying on claim jumpers is my specialty. As they prepared to separate, Miller pulled Clara aside. Be careful. If Silverado catches you interfering with their operation, a trespassing charge will be the least of your worries. We'll be discreet, she promised. The journey to the eastern caves took Clara and Kóshíí over an hour of careful travel through the darkness. Along the way, they passed near a small Apache encampment where Kóshíí briefly spoke with Nasha, explaining their discoveries. The elders will prepare cleansing rituals, he told Clara as they continued on, both for the land and for those who have fallen ill. At the caves, Kóshíí led her to a small seep where water trickled from the rock wall over a deposit of grayish clay. This is it, he said, kneeling to gather the material in a small pouch. My grandmother taught me how to use this when I was a boy. Clara watched him work, struck by the precise, reverent way his hands moved. Your people have lived in harmony with this land for generations, she observed, understanding its dangers and its gifts. Kóshíí glanced up at her. Yet we are called the savages. Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary. Clara felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with their night's exertions. When his fingers briefly touched hers, as he handed her the clay pouch, the contact seemed to linger like an unspoken question. The quiet moment was shattered by the distant sound of a gunshot, then another. They both tensed, looking toward the sound. That came from the direction of the mine, Clara said urgently. Walker, Kóshíí agreed, already moving. Something has happened. Clara and Kóshíí approached the mine area cautiously, keeping to the shadows. The Silverado camp was in chaos, men shouting, lanterns swinging wildly as figures rushed about. Near the mine entrance, 2 company guards stood over a prone figure. Walker, Clara whispered, recognizing the old prospector's weathered hat. Kóshíí held her back. Wait, we cannot help him if we are caught too. They retreated to a sheltered outcropping where they could observe unseen. Minutes later, Hargrove himself arrived, dismounting from a fine bay horse. Even at this distance, his angry gestures were clear as he berated the guards and pointed toward the mine entrance. What is happening? Kóshíí murmured. I'm not sure, Clara replied. but they're agitated about something Walker did or saw. They watched as Walker was roughly pulled to his feet and dragged into a small supply tent. Shortly after, Hargrove and several men entered the mine shaft with lanterns. We need to get closer, Clara decided. Find out what happened to Walker. Using the confusion in the camp to their advantage, they circled around to approach from behind the supply tents. As they drew nearer, the sound of raised voices became clearer. I told you to secure all the old documents. Hargrove was shouting as he emerged from the mine. If word gets out about the contamination levels, we didn't know. The old man was there, one of the guards protested. He must have slipped in during the shift change. And now he knows too much, Hargrove snapped. Keep him secure until I decide what to do with him. He turned to another man. Double the pace on the extraction. We need to get as much ore out as possible before anyone can interfere. Clara and Kóshíí exchanged glances. They know they're poisoning the water, she whispered. They're doing it deliberately. We must free Walker, Kóshíí said, and take what he found. They waited until most of the workers had returned to their tasks, then crept toward the supply tent. Clara distracted the lone guard with a distant noise, while Kóshíí slipped behind him and rendered him unconscious with a swift, practiced movement. Inside the tent, they found Walker bound to a chair, a bruise darkening one side of his face. Clara quickly cut his bonds, while Kóshíí kept watch. Took you long enough, the old prospector grumbled, rubbing his wrists. Found something they didn't want found. He reached inside his shirt and withdrew a folded document. Your husband's. Name is on this, Mrs. Whitcomb. Clara unfolded the paper with trembling hands. It was a land deed, her land deed, but with a hidden codicil she'd never seen before. James had added legal language specifically prohibiting mining operations within 5 miles of their property due to proven mercury contamination hazards. James knew, she whispered. That's why he bought this particular parcel, to create a buffer zone protecting the watershed. And why Silverado wants your land so badly, Walker added. Your deed blocks their expansion plans. We need to get this to Marshal Jenkins, Clara said. This proves James documented the hazard legally. A commotion outside interrupted them. The guard had been discovered. Time to leave, Walker said grimly. They slipped out the back of the tent, just as shouts of alarm spread through the camp. In the confusion, they managed to reach the edge of the camp, but as they prepared to disappear into the night, a voice called out behind them. Mrs. Whitcomb. Stop right there. They turned to see Hargrove approaching with several armed men. Trespassing on company property is a serious offense, he said, his refined voice at odds with the threat in his eyes. As is stealing company documents. These aren't your documents, Clara replied, clutching the deed. This is my husband's land covenant, which you've been violating. A minor legal technicality that would take years to resolve in court, Hargrove smiled coldly, by which time our operation will be complete. And dozens more will fall ill with mercury poisoning, Clara countered. You know exactly what you're doing to the watershed. Hargrove's smile faded. Progress requires sacrifice, Mrs. Whitcomb. The silver in these hills is worth millions. A few sick settlers and worthless Indians are hardly worth considering. Kóshíí had been tensing beside her, and Clara feared he might attack despite the armed men. She placed a restraining hand on his arm. The territorial governor might disagree, she said, especially when he sees the evidence we've collected. Something in Hargrove's expression shifted. Seize them, he ordered his men, and find whatever evidence they claim to have. As the men advanced, a new sound cut through the night, the rhythmic drumming of multiple horses approaching at speed. Everyone froze, turning toward the sound. The cavalry, Walker muttered. Right on time, but Kóshíí's expression was grim. If they find me here... This way, Clara urged, pulling him toward a narrow ravine while Hargrove's attention was diverted. "Walker, go meet the soldiers. Show them the deed." As they disappeared into the darkness, Clara heard Walker's voice rising behind them. "Lieutenant Davies, just the man I wanted to see." Clara and Kóshíí moved swiftly through the darkness, putting distance between themselves and the confrontation at the mine. The sound of voices faded behind them as they descended into a narrow arroyo that offered concealment. "Walker will be all right," Clara said, half to convince herself. "The cavalry won't harm a white man." "But they will hunt for me," Kóshíí replied grimly. "And now Hargrove knows you oppose him." They paused to catch their breath in the shelter of a large boulder. The night had turned cool, and Clara shivered slightly. Without comment, Kóshíí removed his worn leather vest and placed it around her shoulders. "We need to reach my people," he said. "The elders must hear what we've discovered." "Will they help us?" Clara asked, clutching the land deed that had revealed James's secret efforts. "This affects all who drink from the rivers," Kóshíí answered. "Apache settler, it makes no difference to the poison." They traveled for over an hour, Kóshíí leading them along paths invisible to Clara's eyes. Finally, they approached a hidden canyon where several small fires flickered. Kóshíí made a soft, bird-like call that was answered from within the camp. Nasha emerged from the shadows, relief visible on her weathered face at seeing Kóshíí. Her expression turned to surprise when she spotted Clara. "The white woman comes to our hiding place?" she asked in Apache. "She brings important knowledge," Kóshíí replied in the same language. "About the poison in the water, about the markings." Nasha studied Clara for a long moment before nodding once. "Come, the elders are gathered." In the center of the small encampment, several older Apaches sat around a larger fire. They looked up with varying expressions of surprise and suspicion as Kóshíí led Clara into their circle. He spoke at length in Apache, occasionally gesturing to Clara or to the surrounding mountains. One of the elders, a man so ancient his face resembled sun-dried, Leather responded by placing a stone tablet on the ground between them. Clara gasped. Softly, the tablet was covered with carvings identical to those in her Wickiup. "This is Nako," Kóshíí introduced the elder. "He keeps the old knowledge." Nako spoke, his voice cracked but strong, while Kóshíí translated. "He says this stone tablet has been passed down for generations. It tells how the Spanish brought sickness from the mountains." Clara studied the intricate carvings. "These match the symbols in my Wickiup exactly." Kóshíí translated this, prompting animated discussion among the elders. Nako traced one section of the tablet with a gnarled finger. "He says the markings are not just warnings," Kóshíí explained. "They are instructions. A way to cleanse the poisoned land." "How?" Clara asked, eagerly. More translation followed. Kóshíí's expression grew increasingly serious as he listened. "The old ones discovered a special clay that draws the poison from water," he finally explained. "They placed it in strategic locations throughout the watershed, creating a natural filtering system. The markings show where these clay deposits were placed." Clara's mind raced. "Like the clay we collected earlier?" "Yes, but much more. A network that purified the entire region." Kóshíí continued translating as Nako spoke. "When the Spanish came, they destroyed many of these sites, but some remained, hidden and protected." "And the Wickiup?" Clara asked. "Why are the symbols there?" After more discussion, Kóshíí turned to her with surprise. "Your home stands on one of the most important purification sites. The Wickiup's foundation stones form part of the original system." Clara felt a chill of understanding. That's why James built there. He must have discovered the site's significance. Nako removed a small pouch from around his neck and emptied its contents, a handful of reddish soil, onto the tablet. He spoke a few words and sprinkled water over the soil. Where the water touched, The soil turned black. Mercury, Clara whispered. The soil reacts to mercury contamination. Kóshíí nodded. Now Ko says the old system can be restored. The poison can be drawn from the land, but it requires the clay to be placed in the correct pattern, the pattern shown in the markings. Clara thought of the symbols glowing in her Wickiup. And my home is the center point. Yes, Kóshíí confirmed. The elders believe your husband understood this, that he was trying to restore the system before he died. Nasha had been watching Clara intently during this exchange. Now she spoke directly to Kóshíí, her voice urgent. What is she saying? Clara asked. She has had a vision, Kóshíí replied, his expression grave. The Silverado Company plans to blast open the main shaft tomorrow at dawn. If they do this, they will release all the trapped poison at once. The entire watershed will be contaminated, beyond recovery. Clara's hand went to her mouth. We have to stop them. Yes, Kóshíí agreed. But first, we must complete what your husband started. He looked around at the gathered elders. We will need help. Now Ko spoke again, and one by one the other elders nodded. They will help, Kóshíí translated, for the sake of the land that sustains us all. Clara pulled out the land deed with James's codicil. And we have legal grounds to stop Silverado's operation. We just need to get this to someone with authority before dawn. Dawn was only hours away as Clara, Kóshíí, and several Apache elders made their way back toward her homestead. Each carried pouches of the special clay and knew their assigned locations in the purification network. Before they had left the hidden camp, Ko had performed a blessing ceremony, his ancient voice rising and falling in cadences that seemed to make the very air vibrate. What happens if we fail? Clara asked Kóshíí as they walked. The poison will spread through all the water, he replied. Plants will die, animals, people. The land will be sick for generations. They crested a rise that offered a view of the valley below. In the distance, Clara could see lights at the Silverado mine more than before. Wagons and equipment had arrived during the night, including what appeared to be blasting materials. They're preparing, she said grimly, as they drew closer to her property. Clara spotted riders near her cabin, at least half a dozen men, including Marshal Jenkins. Her heart sank. They're looking for me, Kóshíí said, immediately dropping into a crouch. And probably me too, Clara added. Hargrove will have told them I'm helping you. They watched as the men searched the cabin and outbuildings. One of them emerged from the Wickiup, gesturing to the others. Even from this distance, Clara recognized Lieutenant Davies in his cavalry uniform. They found the symbols, she whispered. We cannot approach your home now, Kóshíí said. But we must activate the purification system before Silverado begins blasting. Clara studied the situation, thinking quickly. Dr. Miller, she decided. He lives on the edge of town. If we can reach him, he can help get word to the authorities about Silverado's plans. They circled wide around Clara's property, sending the Apache elders to begin placing clay at the outer points of the purification network while Clara and Kóshíí headed toward town. The journey was tense, requiring them to hide several times. As cavalry patrols passed nearby, when they finally reached Miller's small house, they found the doctor awake, mixing medicines by lamplight. His expression when he opened the door spoke volumes. Thank God, he breathed, quickly ushering them inside. I feared the worst when I heard you were missing. What's happening? Clara asked urgently. Chaos, Miller replied. Marshal Jenkins has a posse searching for you. The cavalry is hunting for Kóshíí, and Silverado has announced plans for a major blast at the old Spanish mine at dawn, supposedly, a demonstration of their new extraction technique. It's worse than that, Clara said, showing him the land. Deed with James's codicil. My husband legally blocked mining in that area because of mercury contamination. Silverado knows about the poison, They're deliberately ignoring the danger. Miller examined the document, his eyes widening. This is solid legal ground to halt their operation. But we need someone with authority to enforce it, Clara said. And we're running out of time. The doctor thought for a moment. Lieutenant, Davies might help. He's a reasonable man, and he has the authority to temporarily halt activities that threaten public safety. He's at my homestead now, Clara said. Looking for us. Then that's where we need to be, Miller decided. I'll go first and explain about the contamination. Scientific evidence might persuade him where other arguments fail. What about me? Kóshíí asked. The soldiers will arrest me on sight. Miller considered this. Come in with me, he said to Clara. But Kóshíí should wait nearby. If Davies agrees to help, I'll signal that it's safe for him to approach. They gathered what they needed, Miller taking water samples and his testing equipment, Clara clutching the deed and James's journal. As they prepared to leave, Kóshíí pulled Clara aside. If this fails, he said quietly, there is another way. The elders are placing the clay. If we can perform the ritual at your Wickiup, the center point, we might still contain the worst. Of the poison, Clara nodded. A backup plan. Yes, but it requires both of us. The symbols respond to you because it is your land. They respond to me because I know the old ways. Their eyes met, holding a moment longer than necessary. Clara felt something pass between them, an understanding deeper than words could express. I'll find a way to signal you, she promised. Outside, dawn was approaching, the eastern sky beginning to lighten. In the distance, they could hear the rumble of wagons, more Silverado equipment heading toward the mine. We're out of time, Miller said grimly. As they prepared to separate, Clara impulsively reached for Kóshíí's hand. Be careful, she said softly. His fingers tightened briefly around hers. You also, Clara Whitcomb. She watched him disappear into the pre-dawn shadows before turning to follow Dr. Miller toward her homestead, toward a confrontation that would determine the fate of the entire valley. Clara approached her homestead alongside Dr. Miller, heart pounding as Marshal Jenkins spotted them and rode to intercept. Mrs. Whitcomb, he called, relief and suspicion mingling in his voice. Where have you been? And where's that Apache? Marshal, Miller interjected before Clara could respond. We have urgent business with Lieutenant Davies. It concerns public safety. Jenkins frowned, but led them to where the cavalry officer was examining a hand-drawn map with several of his men. Davies was younger than Clara expected, perhaps 30, with intelligent eyes and a carefully trimmed mustache. Lieutenant, Miller began without preamble, we have evidence of mercury contamination from the Silverado mining operation. They're planning a blast at dawn that could poison the entire watershed. Davies looked up sharply. That's a serious accusation, Doctor. Clara produced the land deed with James's codicil. My husband documented the contamination legally. This prohibits mining within 5 miles of our property, specifically because of mercury hazards. The lieutenant examined the document, his expression thoughtful. This appears legitimate, but I'd need judicial confirmation to act on it. We don't have time for that, Miller said urgently. I have water samples showing contamination is already occurring. He removed several vials from his bag, including the one with the distinctive metallic sheen they'd collected at the mine. As Davies studied the samples, Clara's attention was drawn to the Wickiup. In the growing dawn light, she could see that the symbols were faintly glowing, visible even from outside the structure. What in God's name? Jenkins muttered, following her gaze. Davies handed the samples to one of his men. Sergeant, ride immediately to the Silverado operation. Tell them to halt any blasting preparations until further notice. Sir, the soldier acknowledged, but before he could mount, a rider appeared on the trail from one of Hargrove's men. Lieutenant Davies, the newcomer called. Mr. Hargrove sends his compliments and asks that you join him at the mine. We've captured an Apache spy attempting to sabotage company equipment. Clara's blood ran cold. Kóshíí. Davies straightened. Tell Mr. Hargrove I'll be there shortly, and inform him that no blasting is to take place until I arrive. The messenger nodded and rode off. Davies turned to Clara. Mrs. Whitcomb, you'll come with us. I want to hear more about these contamination claims. To Jenkins he added, Marshal, secure this property. No one enters the Wickiup until I return. Clara exchanged glances with Miller. This wasn't ideal, but at least Davies was taking the threat seriously. As they prepared to leave, Clara discreetly retrieved a small pouch of the special clay from her pocket and handed it to Miller. If I don't return in time, she whispered, place this at the center of the Wickiup and pour water over it. It's important. Miller looked confused, but nodded. The ride to the mine was tense, the eastern sky brightening with each passing minute. Clara's mind raced, trying to formulate a plan to help Kóshíí while convincing Davies to stop the blasting. When they arrived, the mine was a hive of activity. Workers moved purposefully, setting charges under the supervision of a burly foreman. Near the main office tent stood Hargrove, and beside him, Kóshíí bound and guarded by 2 armed men. Clara's heart twisted at the sight of a fresh bruise on his face, but his eyes remained defiant. When he spotted her, something flickered. In his expression concern, warning. Davies dismounted, helping Clara down from her horse. Mr. Hargrove, he called. I understand you're planning a blasting demonstration this morning. Indeed, Lieutenant, Hargrove replied smoothly. A new technique that will revolutionize silver extraction in the territory. He gestured to Kóshíí. Unfortunately, we caught this savage attempting to interfere with our equipment. I was. Placing purifying clay in the stream, Kóshíí said in clear English, surprising Hargrove, to protect the water from their poison. Davies raised an eyebrow. Poison? Mercury contamination, Clara explained quickly, producing the land deed again. My husband documented it legally. Silverado knows their operation is releasing mercury into the watershed. Hargrove's polished facade gate cracked slightly. Preposterous. Mrs. Whitcomb has been listening to Apache superstitions. It's not superstition, came a new voice. Sam Walker emerged from behind a stack of lumber, accompanied by a cavalry sergeant. I found their internal reports. They've known about the contamination for months. Walker handed Davies several folded papers. The lieutenant scanned them, his expression hardening. Mr. Hargrove, he said finally, these documents clearly show your company has been aware of mercury leaching into the water supply. You've deliberately concealed this information. Hargrove's charm vanished. The economic benefits far outweigh a few sick Indians and settlers. The territorial governor understands this. Why do you think he granted our permits so quickly? Because you didn't inform him of the risks, Davies countered. A sudden commotion from the mine entrance interrupted them. The foreman was shouting, workers backing away from the shaft. Sir, the charges are active. Something's triggered the timing mechanism. How long? Hargrove demanded. 20 minutes, maybe less. Clara's eyes met Kóshíí's across the clearing. In that moment of shared understanding, she knew what had to be done. The ritual at the Wickiup, it was their only chance now. Chaos erupted around the mine as workers scrambled to evacuate. Lieutenant Davies took immediate command. Get these men away from the shaft, he ordered his soldiers. Evacuate everyone within half a mile. Clara used the confusion to approach Kóshíí's guards. Lieutenant, she called, we need him. He knows how to minimize the contamination if the blast can't be stopped. Davies hesitated only briefly before nodding to the guards. Release him. As soon as Kóshíí was free, Clara pulled him aside. The clay network, will it be enough? Not without the center ritual, he replied urgently. We must reach your Wickiup before the blast. Davies overheard them. What are you talking about? Clara made a split-second decision to trust him. The Apache have an ancient system for filtering mercury from water. We've re-established part of it, but we need to activate the central point at my property. To her surprise, the lieutenant didn't dismiss her explanation. The symbols in your structure, they're part of this system? Yes, Kóshíí confirmed. They form a map of the purification network. Davies glanced at the sun, now cresting the eastern mountains. You have 15 minutes at most. Take my horse. It's the fastest. Clara's eyes widened at this unexpected help. Thank you. I'll try to evacuate as many people as possible from the watershed, Davies added. God help us all if you're wrong. As Clara and Kóshíí mounted the lieutenant's horse, Hargrove shouted from where 2 soldiers restrained him. This is absurd. You're listening to primitive superstitions over modern science. Your own reports confirm the danger, Davies replied coldly. And right now, I'll take any solution available. They rode hard, the powerful cavalry mount eating up the distance. As they approached Clara's homestead, they could see Marshal Jenkins and his deputies still guarding the property. We don't have time to explain, Clara said as they galloped past the startled lawmen. Directly to the Wickiup dot inside, the symbols were glowing more intensely than ever, casting reddish patterns across the earthen floor. Kóshíí quickly produced his pouch of special clay while Clara fetched water from her well. The ritual requires fire, Kóshíí explained. Arranging kindling in a small stone bowl, he placed at the center of the Wickiup dot Jenkins appeared at the entrance. What the devil are you doing? Trying to save lives, Clara replied, not pausing in her preparations. Including yours, Marshal. There's a mercury-laden blast about to happen at the Silverado mine. Whether it was her tone or the obvious urgency of their actions, Jenkins hesitated, then stepped back. I hope you know what you're doing, Mrs. Whitcomb. So do I, she murmured. Kosh struck a spark to the kindling, and as the flames caught, he began a low, rhythmic chant in Apache. He guided Clara to kneel opposite him, the fireball between them, and showed her how to sprinkle the clay into the flames. When I nod, pour the water, he instructed between verses of the chant. The symbols on the rafters pulsed in time with his words, growing brighter. Clara felt a strange vibration through the ground beneath her knees, as though the earth itself were responding to the ancient ritual. Outside, Jenkins suddenly called, Something's happening at the mine. Clara glanced through the Wickiup entrance and saw a distant plume of dust rising from the direction of the Silverado operation. The blast, she whispered. We're too late. No, Kóshíí said firmly, continuing the chant. Now is when it matters. Most. He nodded, and Clara poured the water over the clay-infused flames. Instead of extinguishing the fire, the water seemed to intensify it, turning the flames a brilliant blue-white. Steam rose in a perfect column, and the symbols on the rafters blazed with light. A shock wave rolled through the ground as the distant explosion reached them. The Wickiup trembled, but held firm. Outside, Clara could hear the men shouting an alarm dot within the structure. Something extraordinary was happening. The steam from the fire bowl was being drawn toward the symbols, which now glowed like molten metal. Kóshíí's chanting reached a crescendo, his hands moving in precise gestures that mirrored the patterns on the rafters. Clara felt a surge of energy pass through her, connecting her to the land in a way she'd never experienced. For a brief, transcendent moment, she could sense the network of clay deposits throughout the region, could feel them activating in response to the ritual. It's working, she breathed. Kóshíí met her eyes across the fire, his expression intense. Yes, the Old One's wisdom lives. The ground shook again, more violently this time. A distant roaring sound reached them, water moving, earth shifting. The Wickiup swayed dangerously. Outside, Kóshíí shouted, grabbing Clara's arm. They barely. cleared the entrance before the structure's supports gave way, the dome collapsing inward. But even as it fell, the symbols continued to glow, their light seeming to sink into the earth itself. "What's happening?" Jenkins demanded, steadying himself against a fence post as the ground continued to tremble. Clara stared in awe at the phenomenon unfolding around them. Across the landscape, patches of earth were beginning to glow with the same reddish light as the symbols, forming a vast, interconnected pattern that stretched toward the distant mountains. The glowing network spread across the landscape like veins of fire beneath the earth, converging toward the northern foothills where the Silverado mine stood. A distant rumble echoed through the valley, followed by a flash of light so intense that Clara and the others shielded their eyes. When they looked again, a strange phenomenon was unfolding. A cloud of reddish dust rose from the mine area, but instead of dispersing, it seemed to be drawn downward in spiraling patterns, following the glowing lines in the earth. "The clay is absorbing the contamination," Kóshíí explained, wonder in his voice, "just as the old ones designed it to do." Marshal Jenkins stared in disbelief. "I've never seen anything like this in 30 years on the frontier." They watched as riders approached at a gallop. Lieutenant Davies with several of his men, and behind them Dr. Miller and Sam Walker. "Did you see it?" Miller called as they reined in. "The most extraordinary chemical reaction I've ever witnessed. The blast released a massive cloud of mercury vapor," Davies reported, dismounting. "But something's containing it, drawing it into the ground." He looked at Kóshíí with newfound respect. "Your ritual worked." "Not my ritual," Kóshíí corrected. "The wisdom of many generations." "And what about Hargrove?" "The Silverado men?" Clara asked. "Most evacuated safely," Davies replied. "Hargrove is under arrest. His own documents proved he knowingly endangered public safety. The territorial governor will have to address the larger legal questions." As the immediate crisis subsided, Clara surveyed the remains of her Wickiup, the structure that had begun this extraordinary chain of events with a simple storm-damaged roof. Though collapsed, the wooden framework still showed traces of the glowing symbols, now fading as their purpose was fulfilled. "We can rebuild it," Kóshíí said quietly, coming to stand beside her. Clara turned to him, suddenly aware of the uncertain future they faced. "What about you? The cavalry. Lieutenant Davies overheard. "I've been authorized to report that the Apache in this region were instrumental in preventing an environmental disaster," he said formally. "Furthermore, those who assisted will be granted special dispensation regarding reservation requirements." "Meaning?" Clara pressed. "Meaning Mr. Kóshíí is free to stay or go as he chooses, without fear of military pursuit." Davies smiled slightly. "At least under my command." As the others moved away to examine the spreading network of purification, Clara and Kóshíí found themselves alone beside the fallen Wickiup. "Will you return to your people?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. Kóshíí looked out over the land, his expression thoughtful. "My people are scattered now, some at San Carlos, some hiding in the mountains." He turned to her. "But there is important work here. The purification system must be maintained, and knowledge preserved." Clara felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the morning sun. "You could stay," she said softly. "Help me rebuild." "A white woman and an Apache. Brave?" His voice held a hint of challenge, but his eyes were warm. "The town would talk." "Let them," Clara replied. "Some things are more important than other people's opinions." For the first time since she'd known him, Kóshíí smiled fully. Transformation that made him appear younger, unburdened. "Like clean water and safe land, and finding unexpected connections," she added, holding his gaze. His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that bridged worlds. 3 months later, Clara stood in the doorway of her newly rebuilt Wickiup, watching as Kóshíí carefully carved protective symbols into a fresh roof timber. The structure was larger now, incorporating both Apache traditional methods and modern adaptations. Much had changed in the territory. The Silverado operation had been shut down pending a full investigation. Lieutenant Davies had established more respectful relations with the local Apache bands. Dr. Miller had published a scientific paper on mercury contamination that was drawing national attention. And on Clara's land, something extraordinary had taken root. A small community was forming Apache elders, teaching traditional purification methods to interested settlers. Miners learning safer extraction techniques, all centered around the protection of the watershed. The territorial governor himself had visited last week, formalizing the unusual arrangement with a special land charter that recognized the site's importance. The last beam, Kóshíí announced, setting down his carving tools. The symbol he had created combined traditional Apache designs with new elements, a hybrid like their growing relationship. Clara ran her fingers over the freshly carved wood. James would have been fascinated by all this. He started it, Kóshíí reminded her. He saw the connection between our different kinds of knowledge. And now we continue it, she said, looking out over the homestead, where Apache and settler children played together near the garden dot as the setting sun touched the distant mesas. Clara noticed the absence of the strange red glow that had once haunted the horizon. The land was healing, finding balance once more. Kóshíí followed her gaze. The mountain spirit rests, he said quietly. The danger is not gone forever, but it sleeps for now. Clara leaned against him, his arms settling naturally around her shoulders. Then we'll keep watch, she promised. Together. Above them, the new roof stood strong and complete, sheltering them from whatever storms might come.